of life.
Welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report, our region's longest-running public affairs program. Lawmakers from northeastern Minnesota are joining us today for a recap of the week's activities at the state capitol. This is your opportunity to call or email your legislative questions and have them answered live on the air. Minnesota Legislative Report starts now.
Hello and welcome to a new season of Minnesota Legislative Report. I'm your host, WDSC News and Public Affairs producer Greg Grell. Today's show marks the start of the 47th season of Legislative Report. It's the longest running locally produced public affairs program in our region. Now this is your opportunity to call in with questions about the legislative session to the lawmakers who represent you. We have two phone numbers. Locally you can dial 218-788-2844. Or if you're calling from outside the Duluth area, use our toll-free number, which is 1-877-307-8762. Now, when you call, a volunteer will write down your question and then they'll bring those questions to me here in the studio. Please refer to the specifics of a bill when you call, not the bill number, since it's nearly impossible for lawmakers to remember the individual number of the thousands of bills that are introduced each session. The phone numbers and email address will be on screen for most of the program, and we'll get to as many of those questions as time allows today. Now let's introduce the legislators who are here in the WDSC studio, starting to my immediate left with Representative Mary Murphy, a Democrat from Hermantown. Welcome back, Representative Murphy.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Good to see you. Representative Jennifer Schultz, who is a Democrat from Duluth. Welcome back, Representative Schultz. And Senator Eric Simonson. He's a Democrat also from Duluth. Thanks for being here, Senator Simonson.
Thanks, Greg.
So Representative Murphy, I want to start out just with kind of some ABCs of the legislature. This week marked the first committee deadline, and not everybody at home might understand what that means. So what's the significance of the first committee deadline?
Well, it stops the vacillating among the representatives and it puts things on track of what's really going to be considered by the committees after last Friday. All the bills that did not get passed that were introduced last year, and that was over 3,000, I believe, are still alive, or could be still alive and considered, or amended in the first month that we had that committees met. But the deadline means the end of policy only discussions. And so the next week, and the bill has to have passed either if it was introduced last year or this year. And there are over 4,000 bills now. I think over 4,030 bills as of this time period. And so if they don't have finance things in them, it had to be heard in either the House or the Senate in one body. And so it limits the number of bills that will be taken up for the rest of the time period. Friday or Thursday will be the second deadline.
This coming Thursday.
That's correct. Okay. And so after that time period, there will be no new subjects to be introduced. The subject, everybody has to know it in the House or the Senate, and there has to have been some kind of positive action taken.
Okay. Now, Representative Schultz, Representative Murphy mentioned that there were bills that were started last year. It is a two-year session. We often talk about the session as if this is the session, but this is the second part of the two-year session. So there were a lot of bills that are moving on from even last year that you're considering this year.
Yes, there's a lot of bills being heard, and a lot of them are Republican bills. So I was hoping that a lot of our DFL bills would get a hearing, especially a lot of our bills to address gun violence, but in the House at least they're not getting a fair hearing.
And Senator Simonson, what about on the Senate side? Is it the same numbers roughly? There's usually a companion bill on each side in most cases?
You know, the bill introduction numbers are about the same, but I would suggest that the bills that we actually hear in committee, there's a far fewer amount probably than the House hears. The Senate, for whatever reason, seems to be a more deliberative body, and they oftentimes don't take up the bills that really don't have a lot of chance of moving forward. That makes it difficult from a minority perspective to get your bill heard, but at the same time, it also kind of indicates what the priorities are of the majority party too.
Now, we'll get into some of the individual legislative issues as we go along and encourage people to call in right now with their questions for our lawmakers at the numbers on your screen. But Senator Simon, this weekend's been a big weekend of marches and demonstrations across the country calling for some kind of action to prevent violence in schools. What is the Minnesota legislature doing? Anything happening this session on violence in schools?
Well, there's been some discussion at the legislature. There's been bills introduced. There's been hearing requests. There's been attempts to, get the issue in front of committees for at least consideration. And I think, by and large, most of us believe that we should at least debate the topic and let people, have their voices be heard in a public forum. But at this point, it seems like the majority party is just not willing to entertain those bills in a hearing form, in a public hearing form, and that's frustrating. And you can see, just by the volume of people that are showing up and talking about this, that there's great interest, right, across Minnesota, even here in Duluth. And I think Senator Bach had an article in the newspaper the other day that just said, we owe it to Minnesotans to have this conversation, and that's a fair thing to ask. But as of right now, we haven't gotten there, and we are, we're bumping up against deadline.
Representative Murphy, is there anything happening in E through 12? You serve on that committee as far as safety in schools. Any bill that's making progress?
There are several bills that have been discussed, and we have talked around the subject greatly about school safety and what kind of safety you need for the school building itself. And we're also talking about how to keep our children safe in school and how to prevent unsafe circumstances from arising in the school buildings. We're talking about training of staff. We're talking about policies that are established locally as well as statewide for what you can presume will happen every place, in every school building, like registration if you walk in, or is there a central door that you have to go into? Is there someone you have to report to? So that circumstances have some similarity, but also there's always an emphasis that the local school board should be the final answer on how their children should be kept safe and what kind of changes the buildings need for safety. The governor's State of the State message discussed school safety and student safety, and the budget that he followed the State of the State with had additional monies from the surplus, which was about $329 million, some additional money for safety, and possibly some additional money for resources for school safety.
Mm-hmm. Now, as it stands right now, it sounds like it depends on the school district as far as what kind of security measures are in place. We don't have a uniform security law or so to
Not
speak.
yet, but we're talking about it, and there could be something suggested by the end of May when we adjourn.
Okay. Now, Representative Schultz, Republicans seem to be more interested in improving school safety rather than limiting guns. Where do Democrats stand on that approach? Do you think that's a good approach?
Well, we do want to make sure our schools are safe and secure to protect our children. But we also, many of us do not believe that teachers should have guns as a way to address gun violence. We think that, I think Dayton has proposed almost $16 million in a supplemental budget to address issues of mental health and putting in more counselors in the schools themselves to identify students that may be at risk. And we think we should do things like criminal background checks. We think we want to hopefully pass red flag laws, which if someone is a danger to themselves or others, their guns are temporarily restricted, their access to those guns are restricted. So those are bills that have a lot of statewide support, and we're hoping we can get a hearing on those. We haven't been able to successfully in the House. But even increasing the age restriction to 21 is being proposed. So we have a wide variety of bills to address gun violence, and students are protesting, marching at the Capitol, across the country, at our state, so adults, elected officials, do something to protect them. So we really need to prioritize putting children's lives above guns. And I'm optimistic that we're going to make a strong movement on this issue, and hopefully we can do that in Minnesota as well.
Now, I know the issue of teachers carrying guns has been brought up at the federal level. You mentioned it just now. Is that an issue that's actually being considered at the state level, or is that just something that's part of the debate?
I've heard that from my Republican colleagues. There may be a bill on it. I'm not aware of a bill right now, but the Republicans seem to be against any of the other bills, criminal background checks or red flag laws.
Well, Senator Simonson, you've worked a long career in public safety in the fire department. Do you have any just personal thoughts about what do you think the best route is in this situation?
You know, I think it's really important that we have this public conversation and that we don't, come to conclusions or make decisions behind closed doors. It's a fair conversation to have, and obviously, the safety and security of our students and our kids is first and foremost. I was out of town yesterday, but I came home last night, and both of my kids had walked and participated in this march in Duluth. And and when I talk to them about it, or hear from these other kids that visit the Capitol about what's your priority, what is important to you, and it really is just about school has always been just this safe place to go, right? I mean, we have so many kids that struggle at home and don't really know, what tomorrow looks like for them, but they feel like going to school is always this safe place to be. So I feel like somewhere in the middle there's a compromise, but we can't really identify what that is without at least having the conversation.
Well, I'm sure we'll be addressing this issue probably as the session goes on. I appreciate your thoughts on that. And Representative Schultz, let's move on now to another issue that's been getting a lot of attention both locally and nationally, and that's the concern about opioids and opioid abuse, the number of deaths associated with this drug. What's the legislature doing right now about this problem?
Well, there is a bill moving through committees, and this is the stewardship bill, and Representative Baker is the lead author in the House. And last week in committee at 10:30 at night, a lot of the bill was gutted. So it was a dedicated revenue from a penny per pill. So it was basically a fee on the pharmaceutical companies to fund opioid treatment and getting kits to public safety officials so they could prevent overdoses and save people's lives. And that was removed, the penny a pill. And so now we don't have a dedicated revenue source for that. They want to use general fund money. And I'm very disappointed where that bill is. I'm hoping we can make more progress and restore that in the bill. I know the Senate version is a lot stronger than the House version.
Senator Simonson, you want to talk a bit about the Senate version of that bill?
I think the financing piece in there is really important because it's not just one-time money. It establishes a fund going forward. In order for us to really solve this problem or even make a significant dent in it, we're going to have to put some dollars behind it and give our local authorities, our counties, our local governments the ability and the tools to do something. And we need a funding source. And frankly, the Senate bill is stronger, and I believe that when that bill passes off the Senate floor, that funding component will still be in it. At least I'm confident of that today. But at the end of the day, we can't let lobbyists control the course of this bill, and that is what seems to be happening. It's a penny per pill that we're charging the pharmaceutical companies. I think it's a small investment that they can afford to make.
Now, Representative Schultz, this is a very complex issue, and it probably, a single approach might not be the best approach. What are your thoughts about dealing with this issue beyond what we've already talked about? Do you favor a multifaceted approach to dealing with this issue?
Well, I think we definitely need a dedicated revenue source. We already have very limited funds going towards public health, and this is a public health crisis, and we need dedicated revenue. I like the idea of a fee on pharmaceutical companies because they're the ones that pushed this drug out and told doctors it was safe, and they continue to push it out. And so I think that we should put the fee on them because they're the ones that have really put us in this position.
And Representative Murphy, what are your thoughts on the opioid
Well,
question?
I think it has, like you said, it has many facets to it. And public health workers were down last week, and especially the advocating for public health nurses in our communities and in our schools, along with the school nurses kind of thing and programs. And we talked mainly about opioids, and we talked about the mental health needs of children and adults both in our communities, and how we were going to deliver services. And the communities in our area, northeastern Minnesota, have a plan for the various counties to free up more beds and to work together on similar messages to people and education to people about these things. But back to the opioids, I think that the penny a pill paid by the pharmaceuticals is only their fair share of the profits that they are gaining from selling these many, many different varieties. And like Representative Schultz said, they've convinced the doctors that these are good things to have, or good things to prescribe, and they've done it. And so they have part of the responsibility to try to fix the problem.
All right. Any other comments that you want to make?
You know, providers have taken it on themselves to try to limit prescriptions. So we've seen this in the dental community. So dentists are limiting prescriptions for pain and going to alternatives. And also physicians are becoming much more aware of the dangers of these medications. So that's another tool that we're using in the toolkit for public health, is trying to really reduce the number of scripts and look for alternatives that aren't as addictive.
And I'm sure this will be another issue that we'll be talking more about. You are watching Minnesota Legislative Report. Call in those questions for your lawmakers, and we'll get them asked here this afternoon right here on Channel 8. Representative Murphy, big front page story today in the Duluth News Tribune about how to pay for special education services. Really a big problem for schools. It's expensive. It's been an ongoing issue. And is there anything going on right now in the legislature that might alleviate this? This is, again, another multifaceted. There's federal funding, state funding. Some schools seem to be paying a lot more than others for special education services, so it seems like a difficult issue.
Yes. Everything you said is absolutely true.
I did my research.
In some part of the state or the other. And we have we even have some just special education cooperatives in some areas of the state. And it is not simple to explain. And one of the things that you mentioned that is absolutely true is that the federal government is supposed to be a partner in this, and they haven't been paying their fair share for years and years. And so the local communities and the property taxes and the school districts have attempted across the state to various degrees to fill in what the federal government promised to send but did not. And so the state is always, every year now, in the last 4 years for sure, in the last 4 bienniums that we've appropriated money to school districts, it has been an increasing part of the education finance budget. And the state has taken on more and more responsibility. But when they send it back to the school districts, sometimes then school districts rearrange where the money goes. And that part is being looked at more closely than before, and there are several different types of corrections to that part. Okay. And Duluth, the article about Duluth was suggesting that we shore it up.
Mm-hmm. Representative Schultz, do you have some thoughts on this issue?
Well, there's more of a need for resources. We see more students that need additional resources in the school systems and in charter schools. And right now, the system that we have, really the allocations aren't adequate. and the distribution isn't exactly fair. So the formula that we're using needs to be revisited so school districts can better budget and forecast what the total expense is for special education needs of the district, and they know beforehand how much to set aside for that. So there's a lot of work to do. There's several bills moving through the legislature that will create a task force to evaluate it. Representative Liz Olson and Senator Simonson, I believe, are working on those bills with not only our school district, but school districts across Minnesota.
And Senator Simonson, you want to talk about what's happening on the Senate side?
It's overly complicated. Overly perhaps isn't the right word, but it is incredibly complicated. And in part, it is something that we have created, this complicated formula. I think as we look at this, right now there's the bill, I think, that is really moving along, that has the better chance of passing, is to create a task force to look at this issue. I'm not personally convinced that we're not past that point already, but I know Representative Olson, Representative Murphy, and myself have been talking about just looking at it from the Duluth perspective. What could we actually do to resolve this problem, and what does that solution look like? It's probably not for this year, but it's something that we're putting together and thinking about. Maybe we come back next year and we can have a real conversation about a solution.
But for the first time, we have a spreadsheet, and we just got it a week and a half ago, a spreadsheet that is understandable, and we can compare every district across the state with each other now. And we didn't have that before.
So that'll give you
And
some
so
new facts to work with.
Yes, we have a tool that we can make comparisons, and we can ask individual people from those districts, and why is this so different from this when you have the same kind of school population?
And that was the follow-up question I was going to ask, and maybe it's too soon to answer, but just in general, why are there such disparities in cost, as far as you know?
There's different ways of assessing students on the needs, for their needs, and some school districts do a far better job at it than other school districts can because they don't have the people. Also, just the class size that the basic teachers have in their classroom is so different from one area to another area in the state. And that it sometimes creates more people that are saying my child needs more help or needs more assistance. And so there's many, many issues that create what parents are saying their children need and what school districts are saying the children need. And the money that comes from this for the per pupil unit outside of the special education thing, school districts deal with it differently.
All right. Well, it does sound like a pretty complicated issue, and maybe we'll learn more as the year goes on. But we have been getting some calls now from viewers, and I'm going to get to one of those now. For Senator Simonson, an anonymous caller is wondering, what's the current status on Michelle Fishback holding multiple positions in government? I know that was a controversy amongst Democrats. Senator Simonson, update on that situation?
Speaking of complicated issues, right? This is ongoing. She continues to hold the position of lieutenant governor as well as a state senator. There are many of us that believe that that's problematic and conflicts with the state constitution. Where this goes, we will know probably in the next couple of weeks what's going to actually happen here, but I think the Constitution is very clear that you cannot hold both of those positions. And you don't have to think about it very hard to come up with all sorts of examples in your own mind about why this is just a bad idea of really kind of intertwining the executive branch and the legislative branch. It's problematic for operations of the Senate. And my fear is that if we don't resolve this soon, is that it's going to have a really negative impact as we draw the session to a close. And there's questions that remain about the legality of some of the votes that she's taking, or any of the votes that she's taking for that matter, because technically, is she really a senator? That is the question, but I think we'll know more in the next week or two.
And Representative Schultz, this is mostly a Senate issue right now, obviously, because she does serve in the Senate and is also a lieutenant governor.
Yes. So I find it's problematic because those individuals living in her Senate district feel they're not being represented, and the state may feel it's not being represented because she's not doing the duties of lieutenant governor.
Representative Murphy, you've served in the legislature longer than anybody here on the panel. Have you ever seen anything like this in your career? Is there anything that you can compare it to over those years?
No, not exactly. But I do think, like Senator Simonson said, you ask yourself if you should be questioning this more. And I think I ask myself, we should have, or I tell myself, we should have questioned in the Ventura administration when the lieutenant governor was also chair of transportation. And I can't remember her name now, her last name now, Carol was her name. And we should have questioned that more. But it seemed like she was commissioner as well as lieutenant governor.
All right, well, I'm sure we'll be learning more about this in the coming weeks. So you are watching Minnesota Legislative Report. Get those calls into your legislators, as Bonnie in Proctor did. And Bonnie was listening to our conversation about school safety, and she asked, why do they not invest in bulletproof doors in schools? She's in opposition to giving teachers guns. Representative Schultz, is that a step that you think would be useful?
I believe that is listed in the governor's supplemental budget. So I think there's close to $6 million for giving schools funds to invest in things like bulletproof glass. I'm not sure where they would install that, but I know in my children's school, my boys are in 3rd grade and 1st grade, and it's locked. It's a secure building. There's one entrance, all the rest are locked, and you need permission to get in. So we want all schools to be safe, and the more we can do to make sure they're secure and safe, the governor is supportive of that.
So is the governor's proposal, is there a bill that has similar language right now in your knowledge? Or?
I'm not sure if there's an actual bill, but if it's in the governor's supplemental budget, it will be in maybe one of the agency's bills, or it could be some individual legislator that serves on education will bring that forward. And it could even have bipartisan support. So we're waiting. But in the last 3 weeks, there have been 21 threats to schools in Minnesota.
And Representative Murphy, you're on the E12 Finance. Anything as far as that goes?
It could possibly be, the bills that we've heard now have been held over for possible inclusion in the omnibus finance bill.
And of course, the omnibus bills are those big catch-all bills, right, that get a lot of things in them. So.
Those omnibus bills are the bills that have been closely scrutinized and have a lot of information in them, as well as finances, and we can't pull the topics out individually until we know what the targets are for the final appropriations that are made. And targets are those subjects like K-12 will get how much of the $300 million, and higher ed will get how much of the $300 million, and transportation will get how much of the $300 million. You have to keep in mind this is the second year. The appropriations for those various appropriations for those topics were made last year for a 2-year period. And so there's possibilities of new targets for these additional things that have come up now. But really, this year, for spending purposes, it's a bonding year, and our local projects and infrastructure across the state and for the state agencies are what we are supposed to be focusing on. predominantly.
And Senator Simonson, that brings up the question of bonding bill, and we haven't been hearing a lot, at least the citizens haven't been hearing a lot about bonding right now. Where are we in that process? What do you think about the outcome or the outlook for a bonding bill this year?
Well, I think, as we get into April, you'll start to hear more and more about this as the bill starts to take shape. Representative Murphy talked about targets. At some point in time, the majority parties are going to have to decide, what size of bill that they actually want to bring forward. But there is a lot of, realistically, there's a lot of behind the scenes discussions happening every day about bonding and, individual legislators carrying their personal projects and projects from their district forward and making sure that they're part of the discussion as this bill kind of takes shape. But I think as we come back from break after Easter and get into April and we get past these policy deadlines, and then we can have, you'll see more and more discussions around bonding and what that bill looks like. But what I'm hearing is somewhere between $800 million and $1 billion potential size of a bill.
All right. Representative Schultz, this past fall, citizens in Duluth overwhelmingly approved raising taxes to help pay for road repairs. But before that can happen, the legislature has to pass a bill. Where is that bill right now? And what do you think? Is it going to happen this session?
Well, because we had over 70% of the population in Duluth supporting the half-cent sales tax, that will be dedicated revenue for road improvements. I believe it will pass. It's going to be getting a hearing in the tax committee. I was guaranteed that will happen. And the chair of the tax committee seems to be supportive. So I'm pretty optimistic that we will have dedicated funds for that if a tax bill, an omnibus tax bill, passes the legislature by May 21st.
And I know in doing a little research on this that sometimes it takes a session or two to make one of these changes depending on, I guess, who's in charge. So you're still optimistic that could happen?
Well, because we had a huge change in federal tax statutes, laws, we have to address tax conformity this session. So ideally there will be an omnibus tax bill. And we're working every day on how we're going to conform to the federal tax bill and what the implications are for Minnesota.
Okay. Now, Representative Murphy, you serve on the Legacy Funding Finance Committee, and the Legacy Bill is that percent of tax that is dedicated to arts and cultural heritage in Minnesota. Is there anything happening this year? I know there's been some talk about a controversial video game that was created with legacy funding, and that there's some people worried about how the money is being spent. What can you tell viewers about legacy spending and any potential changes this year?
The Legacy Committee is meeting, and the bill that you spoke of was heard the other day, and it was held over for possible inclusion if there is a bill.
Okay.
There was misinformation out about that bill. It was received by the committee, and there was no discussion the other day. Okay. But I think that the problems that were put out in the newspaper were answered. And the creator, the person that received the appropriation, was employed in Minnesota at the time. Mm-hmm. And the money was spent in Minnesota, and it's not a game like kids watch. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In that sense. And so most of the bad things that were said about it have been answered. And so there doesn't seem to be, nobody spoke for it or against it really the other day. So I don't think that we're going to hear a whole lot about it again. And after the product was delivered, the person that created the product got another job in another state. And we can't tell people that they can't go and get another job once they've completed their project.
Sure, sure. Now, Representative Schultz, one of the issues that was pretty high profile prior to the session was the issue of sexual harassment in the legislature. What's happening? I know there was talk of a task force and maybe some changes. What can you tell us about what's happening with that issue?
Well, at least on the House side, we've created a subcommittee of the Rules Committee to work on issues around workplace safety and respect. So we've been convening that every Monday at 9 a.m. in St. Paul.
And you serve on that
I
committee.
serve on that committee. So I was appointed to the Rules Committee specifically to serve on this subcommittee. And we have heard a lot of testimony on potential ideas for task forces outside the legislature and what evidence-based good policies are to have enforced at the legislature from experts in employment law and practices. So we're going to hear from about 10 more experts on Monday about what we could do going forward to change the culture and the environment to make it safer and more respectful for women working at the legislature. And not just members, but lobbyists,
Right.
visitors,
There are
staff.
hundreds of people that work in the
Yes.
legislative process.
Yes. So we hope we can come to some agreement, bipartisan agreement, before the end of session and start implementing something soon after session.
Have you noticed a change in culture just because of the attention, even before any actual rules have been made? Does it seem like it's a more respectful place this time around?
It can improve. There's room for improvement, significant room for improvement. And we've all had mandatory training. And I think many people, including myself, were not happy with part of the training. And I think we'll receive more training that addresses some of the gaps that we didn't cover. I think we can improve it. It's just going to take time.
Senator Simonson, from your perspective, being a male in the legislature, what do you think needs to be done, and you know, what is happening right now in the Senate side?
Well, there's not a lot happening on the Senate side. When we came into session, we were all required, of course, to go to mandatory training. And keep in mind, these decisions are all made by the majority party about what we do or don't do here. So we participated in the training, and that was the end of it on the Senate side. This committee that the House is having on their side, we do not have a like committee in the Senate. And I think there's probably a couple of reasons for that. I think a lot of folks within the Senate itself believe that the Senate is a more behaved body, if you will. But I think that's the wrong attitude and the wrong approach. We probably should have looked at ourselves and spent this period of time that has gone by looking at ourselves through some sort of an open committee process, because I do think that you know, there has been a change in behavior that I've noticed. It's visible. People are just more careful. But at the same time, I think that the more education that we can provide all of our members and our staff about what is and what isn't right to do, you know, in terms of behavior, the better off we will be in the end. So I wish we would have done more on the Senate side, and perhaps we will in the future. But right now, it's not enough, in my opinion.
And Representative Schultz, what kind of action do you think the Subcommittee on Workplace Safety and Respect might issue, or what kind of power is there? Would it be regulations, or how would that work?
We're going to be looking at our policy that we currently have and improve our policies. So we have a process where people can report and possibly anonymously report and have follow-up. We're talking about potentially doing a survey to give us some information on the climate and the environment where we serve, and even having an anonymous tip line. So we're getting suggestions from the experts, and then we're going to be discussing those suggestions with the body and implementing those where there's agreement.
Representative Murphy, you're the DFL lead on the Ethics Committee. Is there anything on the Ethics Committee dealing with this harassment, or was that something that could happen with the Ethics Committee to be involved in this situation?
I don't think so. I don't think so until the Rules Committee, Subcommittee comes to a conclusion. The Ethics Committee is predominantly, the rules of the Ethics Committee has just, if a member of the House of Representatives has something that they feel is unreasonable that another member did, they can bring a charge, and the Speaker has 7 days to determine if that is a legitimate thing or not. So it's a much narrower thing, and it's because if something was wrong, if somebody did something wrong or inappropriate, a member can charge another member, but that's all. It doesn't have any of these, for the workforce or the human resources people or anything like that.
It's a fairly narrow.
Yes, it's very narrow. So I don't think that's the vehicle that you'd use. We do have something, though, that's been working for several years, a civility group, and that's the House people and Senate people working together that have provided some interesting opportunities for members of, and sometimes with the public too, at the Capitol, to have maybe a lunch or a meal or a brown bag or just an event. And last week there was one that I really wanted to go to, but I wasn't able to because I had a pension commission meeting. At the same time that was being held, it was about, they were giving us the opportunity to learn how to negotiate better. And they had people from Bureau of Mediation Services there to instruct and to set up a couple situations where you had the opportunity to pose a question and then how to mediate it, kind of thing, and what types of what you could say to better get a response of what you were trying to do. So it was a hands-on kind of thing, and I thought that would be very beneficial because we negotiate in our committees and we negotiate especially in conference committee when the House and the Senate go together. And we need more types of training in those types of things, just to make us better.
All right, well, we'll keep following this issue and we'll see where it goes. Tim from Jacobson has a question about a bill that would legalize aerial fireworks, and is it going to pass? I'm not sure if anybody here sits on a committee, but I know Senator Simonson has an opinion about aerial fireworks, so maybe you can tell us what you know if there is a bill out there, Senator Simonson.
Well, the short answer is it's not going to pass this year. Governor Dayton has made it quite clear that that bill is not going to pass. This bill seems to come up just about every year for consideration, and at least at this point that there's not support in the governor's office. I'm not convinced that there's support in the Senate to pass such a bill. I'm sure that we will continue to have this debate going forward, but at least at this point that the folks that are concerned about the safety, some of those concerns that they bring forward are overwhelming and compelling. And I think that this bill is just one of those things that gets talked about often, but doesn't seem to have the traction.
Is it pushed by the fireworks lobby, or is there other proponents in the state?
Well, I think it's not so much the fireworks lobby themselves. I'm not convinced that they really have a real strong lobbying presence as it is about, just the freedom to do things. But there are many things that we restrict because they're inherently dangerous, and this is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But now, the thing that helps this is that we've expanded, especially around the 4th of July, those little businesses that people can have. And now people are saying, well, we need it for the sales tax that we receive or the community receives from those little tents and all that.
Fireworks
yeah,
stands,
the pop-ups. And then there are some people that are saying that it's a family business to raise money so that they can send their kids to college. Well, if their kids don't have fingers on their hand, how are they going to count the pennies? You know, I just don't understand it. I just think we're going too far, that it's for what it'll raise, or what kind of sales tax it'll raise, or how much better the state is off. And after all, didn't we go to the cabin and have fun throwing those firecrackers and throwing those things? And it's always supervised. But by 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, when it's supervised and you're shooting off those things, is everybody that's shooting them off supervising them and shooting them off? Are they in capable positions to be doing the best kind of judgmental shooting off of those things? I just think that we've gone too far. We've got enough. Communities are putting on their own shows. You don't have to have a show at every single lake or every single pond, in my opinion.
So we have at least 2 no votes here, I think, if the bill ever goes forward. All right. Well, thank you, Representative Murphy.
Thanks for bringing it up, because I haven't gotten to vent on that for a few years now, and I still see my golden axe that I got from the fire chiefs because I warded it off for so long. Okay. And I just cry when I have to have you ask a question if we're going to do it again.
Well, Tim,
make it looser than it already is.
Tim from Jacobson wanted to know. So.
Well, Tim, I know that I have to disagree with you.
All right, we are getting down towards the end here now. There's one issue that has been frustrating a lot of Minnesotans, and Senator Simonson said that's the state's new motor vehicle license and registration computer system, which has been having a lot of glitches, costing the state lots and lots of money. What's an update on that? I know some more money was just appropriated by the legislature recently.
It has been frustrating, and I can't imagine that anybody that's had any interaction with the DVS over the last year or so hasn't had some level of frustration for some particular reason, and it almost always comes back to this computer software.
And this is the MNLARS acronym?
MNLARS, right.
MNLARS. Yeah.
But we did pass a bill, actually. We passed a bill off the Senate floor. The House passed a bill. It went to conference. They worked out an agreement with the governor's office, and that bill was going to become law. And essentially what it does is it unfortunately has to put more money towards the problem, but that is about the only way that we're going to correct this problem. The legislature is faced with some options. We can stop funding it altogether and make it go away, but that is, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars thrown away. We can put some money into it now and hopefully get this thing back on track and get corrected over the next, however many months it's going to take. But I think the key is that there was a compromise reached. We found some money within the system. We appropriated the money. The governor signed the bill. So help is on the way, but it is going to take some time. And I know people are very frustrated with this system, but at the end of the day, if we can get the right people doing the right programming and writing the right codes, I feel like that there's an opportunity to fix it. But unfortunately, we have to spend a little bit more money to do that. But that's just the reality of where we're at.
And Representative Schultz, how did we get here? How did this go wrong, so massively wrong?
Well, we have all of these old legacy systems, computer systems and data warehousing systems, and it's very expensive to upgrade those and to make sure that all the data is safe and secure. So cybersecurity is expensive, and migrating from an old system to a new system is very expensive. And it is really unfortunate that so many people had to wait for their renewals or tabs or registering a new vehicle. And they hired many people to speed up the processing of those applications, and they made a big dent on that. And then Republicans stalled fixing the problem, and a lot of individuals, because they did not receive the additional funding, started looking for jobs elsewhere. So these were IT experts, and they're already hard to find to fill the jobs we have, and we lost many, and we were fearful that we would lose more and have an even more difficult time filing those applications and getting people's needs met. But I'm glad that we decided to fund it and fix the problem, and hopefully we're learning more about what type of contracts to write to fix the legacy software problems. We need more students to go into IT and cybersecurity. So I think we'll see more programs popping up in Minnesota to train individuals in that area. And if people are watching, investigate this area as a potential new career avenue. Apparently there's a lot of money in the field.
Well, you serve on the Higher Education Career Readiness Committee, so maybe that can be an emphasis of your committee.
We have actually heard several bills. Metro State has asked for $5 million to invest in a new cybersecurity program. St. Cloud State University has a program. So Minnesota State Universities are encouraging people to pursue that area. And then I've been working with computer science faculty at the University of Minnesota Duluth to offer cybersecurity. So I think we're going to see more programs.
And Senator Simon, Representative Murphy, go ahead.
It goes back, though, to the question of should the state government provide the service, or should private contractors provide the service? And it all got going with the idea that we should stop state government from doing some of that work and contracting it out. And the contracting it out and to the independent companies that got the contracts, the companies failed. And so the age of the system, with the idea that we were going to save money by contracting out, came back to bite us in the heels.
And Senator Simonson, I think Representative Schultz and Representative Murphy both mentioned cybersecurity, and that is something, of course, especially with the licensing where people's personal information is out there. So you can understand why you want to be really careful with the security around that.
You absolutely have to be careful, and this is but one legacy computer system that the state has. I mean, this issue is not going away anytime soon. We have a number of systems that need to be upgraded. And securing people's private information is critically important.
And I forgot to mention that Lake Superior College is pursuing cybersecurity as well. So we'll have something right in our own backyard soon.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time. We do have a few questions I want to try to get to before we are out of time. And one caller who didn't leave the name was listening to our discussion about the opioids, and Representative Schultz wonders why hospitals continue to buy products from the companies that produce opioids that are abused. Why not boycott these companies? But that would have to be a company decision, not a legislative decision.
Yes, that would be up to the provider, but many people rely on opioids because it's the only thing that may work for their pain, and many people can take them responsibly and not develop an addiction. So they don't want to just stop prescribing them because some people really need it to address pain.
All right, we're running out of time, but there's a bill in the legislature called Tobacco 21 that would prohibit the sale of tobacco to anyone under the age of 21. It's been getting some attention recently. Representative Schultz, you serve on some of the health committees. Is that a bill that's going to move forward, and what are the chances it'll pass?
It is getting a lot of support. We have a lot of young adults, students supporting that. And we've seen for the first time an increase in smoking rates, and a lot of that has to do with vaping and new ways and chewable tobacco. So we think that it would be better in terms of public health and individuals' health if we reduce the access to tobacco products, if our goal is to reduce the number of people who are addicted to tobacco.
Is there a companion bill on the Senate side, Senator Simonson? What can you tell us about that?
There is, and I'm a co-author on that bill. I know that bill's been around for a while, and I do think that it's getting more and more traction. It's one of those bills that's going to take a few cycles to get through, but I do think that there's a movement towards passing this bill, and folks are starting to see the actual data behind it and the reasons behind it, and I think that it's going to get somewhere. Probably not this year, but I think its time is coming.
Representative Murphy, just a little bit of time left. What can people look forward to this upcoming week? You said there's another important deadline this week before the end of the coming week.
Yes, this is the second deadline is coming up. We can look forward to another busy week, probably not quite as busy as last week, but committees will be meeting during their regular time plus in the evenings so that they can complete their agendas. And it's our last chance to say, please, please, I need this bill heard. And I don't have any of those bills because I have mostly tax and spending bills. But so mine, that deadline will be later on.
Well, I'd like to thank.
But I do know that
only a little bit of time left.
the bills that I have for my local communities on taxes or Two Harbors wants their levy, they will be heard in April.
All right, sounds good. And Representative Murphy, Representative Schultz, Senator Simonson, thank you all for being here this afternoon. That is all the time we have this week for Minnesota Legislative Report, and thanks again to the lawmakers who took time to come to the studio today to be here. There will be no show next Sunday due to Easter, so join us for our next show on Sunday, April 8th at 4 p.m. for an update on the legislative session. For the crew here at WDSE, WRPT, Public TV, I'm Greg Grell. Have a great evening.